welcome to our webinar on the top 15 questions in investment banking. Interviewing has changed a lot in the last few years. 10 years ago, interviews comprised running through your resume. Applicants were prepared for personal questions like, tell me about yourself, what are strengths and weaknesses? Nobody asks you what your strengths and weaknesses are anymore. And if you're therefore preparing for that as a question, you're going to be in for a nasty surprise. Those days are long gone. Interviews in finance sector are grueling mental workout. They're like jumping hoops, and at least 5-6 hoops if you want to get into investment banking. It's much like preparing for an exam, and it makes sense. They're going to pay you to be efficient, and they're hiring you so you can do the jobs, and hiring is a costly process. So they're going to make you go through 5, 6, 7, 10 interview processes, including data, including aptitude tests and group discussions and all of that, because it takes time. And once they hire you, they don't really want to look back. It requires time on part of the HR and the line management. They take time to interview you and then discuss the interview internally. They run it by the business. You try and understand why are they spending so much time. Finance interviews today are usually divided into the following. We're going to spend some time on that as well, on how these investment banking interviews are structured, what do you do before you go into the interview, what do you do during the interview, and now, of course, as well, a little bit about what you do after the interview. And through this time, I will give you hints on what to do, how to prepare specifically for investment banking. And then I'll spend the last 20 minutes or so where we're going to actually just do a quick rundown of my 15 top questions. Take a notepad, get your notepad ready then, and and a little bit about how you can best answer them. Okay. And before we do that, here's a little bit about myself. I am an investment banker by trade, and I wanted to be an investment banker when I was 14, 15 years old. I saw this show on Capitol Hill. People were wearing these fancy clothes. They were walking in, 3-inch heels. They were talking very quickly, a lot of jargon. They felt very smart, very confident, very different world to the world that I came from, which was a small town in South India. The most important thing I realized then as I went through, and of course, then I decided to hone my resume to become an investment banker, which I did, but 10, 11 years later. So it was an 11-year journey. And through that journey, I've learned a lot of things that I'm going to spend some time sharing with you today. And of course, after that, and a little bit about the journey is a quick recap on my resume. I finished my university at Oxford. I then joined the Hindu Business Line as a research analyst. Working for a newspaper is a great grounding for trying to understand how industry works, because you spend a lot of time in steel plants, really falling in love with how things are made, how products are created, is an essential part of being an investment banker. And of course, after that, I joined ISB. I was one of the early batches. And from there on, I went on to head treasury at Anand Automotive Systems, which is an automotive component manufacturer based out of Delhi. They had a group of 17 companies, and I was put in charge of their treasury operations, which essentially means I handled their import-export, handled their funding requirements, both working capital as well as term loan. I made sure that they bought their imports in they had enough cheap foreign currency to buy imports, and they made sure that they hedged their exports as well, so to make the most out of the rupee. Yeah. And that's very important. From there, of course, I then was, because I had a lot of buy-side experience, a quick thing on buy-side and sell-side. If you are working on behalf of yourself, investing, raising money, you're working on the buy-side. If you are going to be doing it as an intermediary, you are on the sell-side. And investment banking is a sell-side job, so you are essentially here and interviewing for the sell side. Okay. So then I was on the buy side then, and then therefore I joined the sell side with Avendus Capital, then a small boutique investment bank, and today is easily the most premier boutique investment bank in the country. I joined, but now and over time I got promoted, and then I began to hire, and so you're really getting getting an insider's track, if you will, to what it takes to prepare for an investment banking job. So as I said about the agenda today, I'm going to be spending the first half really of of this webinar talking about how to prepare for an investment banking interview. This will include both technical and as well as personal tips. And then, of course, the last half talking about the top 15 investment banking questions. And then we'll leave around 10 minutes or so for any questions you might want to have. Yeah, sorry. Let me just share. So I think a little bit about how you. So investment banking interviews tend to be very structured processes. Even though we don't have a very well-established routine, in like they do in America or Europe, we do now have a fairly structured process. While we don't have, well, campus placements only happen at very few universities and colleges in India. We do have a fairly structured process now, and it usually starts with the 3 to 4. Usually it comprises 3 to 4 rounds. And the first round is, if you are starting out in an entry level, will basically be an aptitude test. Something that we of course do. We of course train you for at Imarticus Learning. Followed by in some cases a group discussion, but usually the rounds of interview will begin with a basic domain and personal, which is essentially like a verbal exam, followed by another domain interview by a more senior executive, which usually is a repetition of some of the questions you shared earlier, followed by perhaps an HR interview, and then of course, if you make it through the 3 or the 4 rounds which will encompass this, you will then go get interviewed by a senior, well, the most senior, usually a director or a partner, and that essentially is you're pretty much there, and it's a tete-a-tete over whether you'll be a good fit in the organization. We rarely have informal interviews. Essentially, if you bump into them into a conference, yes, and we're going to spend some time on how to develop an elevator pitch during this piece, because while it's rare that you just happen to bump into the CEO of MAPE or Veda or Edelweiss or even Goldman Sachs. If you do happen to be sitting next to them on a flight, there's no harm in having a 30-second elevator pitch that can help, And then, of course, finally, we will of course spend some time on what to do during group discussions, etc. Okay. Before the interview, these are some of the basics. You need to have your resume ready. You need to research the industry, the company, recall situations that show, and in your resume, you should essentially focus on 4 things. Your resume needs to showcase your analytical abilities and your problem-solving abilities, your teamwork abilities, your leadership abilities, and your hard work, your ability to work hard, because that's a key quality in investment banking. How do you show analytical? Throw in any problem that you've solved in work, or if you've never worked before, in school. If you have any what to say in terms of problem solving, how did you solve a problem at work? It could also be a problem you solved in a team sport. Perhaps you were the captain, and then you can mix that up with your leadership skills. And another, of course, another thing you can do is, of course, mix it up with your communication skills as well. Of course, hard work is to show a body of achievement, be it scholarships are great, but generally a body of accomplishment that is consistent over time, which means ideally you do not want to show lengthy periods of not working, lengthy periods of not doing anything. Even if you are perhaps having a period where you're working for your GMAT or studying for your GMAT or going to business school, try to get in an internship that doesn't show any periods of work there are gaps in your resume. Recruiters do not like gaps in your resume. We do not believe you should be taking 1 month off to do your GMAT. We believe that if you are doing your CFA, do it while you're working, because I don't think it takes 3 weeks to prepare for your GMAT. You can be very, very, very honest here. Of course, before you interview, you research the industry and the companies very, very well. This is the company that you're going to work for. We're going to spend some time on the questions that you need to prepare for your actual interview a little later. Identify reasons you want to work for the company. That's a very basic question. Why do you want to work here? And you can't just say, oh, I like your firm. A great way to go about this is going to the internet and find 3 things they've done in the last year. If they're an investment bank, talk about 3 deals that they've done. You know, they have something called tombstones. They have it on the website. Using those tombstones, go into Google, type out the deal name, find out a little bit about the deal. Say something to the impact of, I like the fact that you're working on these kind of deals, cross-border deals, domestic deals, working with Indian clients, that you have offices all over the world and therefore I can get to learn from different people. Don't just say things like, oh, I like investment banking because it's a global industry and I get to travel. I mean, I'm not going to hire you. You need to be very specific. The key in investment banking is to be specific. And showing that you know specific things about the company you want to work for means that you are a specific and detail-oriented person. And we love detail-oriented people. We want people who know the difference between one screw and another screw if they're looking at a screw company. Okay, not saying, oh, this company makes screws. All right, so it's very important to do that. Again, going back to those points, recalling situations that show behavioral actions. Again, the problem solving, the leadership, the communication, be specific. The skills the employer is seeking, we've already covered this. The 4 major skills are problem solving, communication, leadership, and teamwork, as well as 5th, hard work. These have to be showcased, and these have to be you think of your resume as a starting point, and all the points in your interview will be essentially springboards to talk about them, expand every point in a lot of detail. Okay. Of course, if you've done all this, then make sure you have a mock interview with at least 3 people, and try to get a mock interview. And we do mock interviews, by the way, at Imarticus Learning, and that's a significant, big part of our interview training process. Get someone from the industry or someone who is who interviews people for a regular basis to interview you. Don't get your mom or dad or your brother or your sister to interview you, because if 1, they're going to be a little biased, 2, they're not going to be very aggressive, and investment banking interviews tend to be quite aggressive. And of course, finally, prepare questions to ask the employer. This is again this is it's like entrapment. We want to see whether you've actually spent time on learning a bit about us. And we know that we're not a perfect company. So asking me questions, but don't ask me like, do I need to work on the weekends? Okay, that's not the kind of question I'm talking about. I'm as much as possible, stay away from the personal aspect of your job. The minute we feel you're worried to work hard, we will not hire you. So, but focus instead on what is your training policy. That's a great question. How do you develop and train your employees? What kind of induction do I have if I join you? What is your induction program? If you're not a CFA, ask them questions like, I would like to complete my CFA. What kind of support would I get from your company? And I'm not looking for any support, but I want to understand, do you prefer it? Do you not prefer it? Stuff like that, you know. And of course, very important, please, if you're going to work for an investment banking company, you need to have your passport ready. So if they're going to ask you a question, do you have a passport? Please do have a passport. I'm sure all of you do, but it's just throwing it out there so you know that you need it. And of course, it's important as you don't. So it's quite funny how so few people know what investment banking is, and I'm not going to cover that today. We have a number of webinars online on the Imarticus website that tell you exactly what investment banking is, but so few people actually know what investment banking is. They don't know how to answer even that basic question. So research the industry. Now, before you go into who are the competitors? Who do these people compete with? Most people that come to me don't even know the difference between boutique investment banks and bulge investment banks, bulge bracket investment banks. Am I a bulge bracket? Am I a boutique? You can't come in to me if I'm a boutique and then tell me I want to work in equity capital markets. I don't have an equity capital market division. Also learn, while I'm going to spend some significant time on actual investment banking technical questions later. Find out a little bit about the world, the landscape. What divisions does the company have? What divisions does an investment bank have? What parts do you work for? Trading, sales, equity research, etc. To understand and to be immerse yourself in the industry a little bit more. Check glassdoor.com for reviews on actually, do you want to work for the company? Maybe the reviews are terrible. Go to glassdoor.com and find out, do you want to actually work for them in the first place? If you are from a business school, you usually have a network, and ask your network if somebody works there, if somebody has worked there, to give you a little bit of a feel on what it's like to work for the company. Yeah. Dressing for interviews. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but and imagine you're an interviewer. Who would you like to interview? Would you like someone who comes in with a scruffy shirt, sweaty armpits, a brow full of sweat, doing this, and holding a sheaf of papers in his hand? I don't think so. Because what does that say to you? That he's a hurried person, that he is not meticulous, that he or she is not meticulous, that he or she doesn't think they need to keep their things well. Um, uh, so that's very important. So when I mean dress for the interview, it really means prepare for the interview. Dress the way you would like somebody to be dressed if you're going to interview them. So for men, it's very simple. Wear a suit, a nice dark suit with a tie, absolutely mandatory. A tie is mandatory for investment banking. And for women, you can dress in a sari, you can dress in a straight, nice, structured salwar kameez. You can dress in a skirt suit. You can dress in a skirt pant. It's less what you're wearing than how neat, clean, and well put together it is. That it's not scruffy and that it's well thought through. That you've spent some time putting it together. That's important. Carry a binder, of course, and a portfolio to contain. Always take copies of your resume. Have a pen on you. Absolutely. Please don't ask your interviewer for a pen. We will, again, it's just, you have to understand that don't give me reasons not to hire you. Give me reasons to hire you. It's very important, which means that if you ask me for a pen, I keep thinking he's not prepared. You know, there should be no opportunity. It's going to be hard enough that you're not going to make some mistakes during the technical part anyway. You're going to make some mistakes answering the question. So make sure that you know the things you can get perfect, which is dress, preparation, getting there early. All of that is perfect. So it leaves a little room for errors later on in the interview. Of course, don't chew gum, bring beverage. If you do have a bottle of water, put it in your bag or leave it outside. And essentially, be think of yourself. Think that you are essentially going in for an interview and that you need to be formal. Formality is the word. No, it doesn't matter how informal the interviewer is. They could be with rolled up sleeves. She could be wearing a t-shirt and jeans. That's perfectly fine. That's the interviewer. That's how they dress. That doesn't mean that's how you follow. Make sure you have a consistent game plan and dress for that. Yeah. Of course, we're not going to spend too much time on this. Navy, gray, black, skirts should be below the knee, but you know all of the makeup should be natural. And of course, choose one handbag. For men, well-fitted suit, wear socks that match your trousers, clean your shoes, it's very important, and make the tie knot small. But again, these are essentially what I always say is make sure you're neat, clean, and in a well-fitted attire. Yeah. Um, think like the interviewer. Again, this is going back to what I said. Uh, what what would you like? What would the, who would you want to hire? Who will make my company stand out? Investment banking is a client-facing job. Will this person make me look good? Will this person represent me well? You know, that's very, very important. And so the will you make his life easier? So don't be a liability. Always come across as an asset, which is very, very critical. Now it comes to what kind of questions will the manager ask. We're going to spend some time on that later. But most investment banking interviews are divided into two parts. They divide it into domain, and they divide it into HR. I'm going to spend some time on HR, and the top investment banking questions will then cover domain. HR is essentially the open question, tell me about yourself, is try to make it a story. And the way you do that is take a piece of paper and write the story. How would you talk about yourself to someone else? And write it as long and as lengthy as you like, because you're writing it down. And then read it out and make sure it sounds nice. Tell them, and begin from the beginning. You can start with of course they know what your name is, so you could either start with saying, as my resume states, I will just run through my resume. Tell them a little bit about where you studied, what kind of work you've done in the past, and snippets during that process. Build in examples. Try not to let them get a word in the beginning. So keep talking. Run through your entire resume. So for me, it would be, this is the things that I'd like to do. I studied here, and during this, I liked this a lot. I got a scholarship here, and during the scholarship here, that made me realize this, and this led me to this part of my life. In this part of my life, I did these 3 things very well. They taught me these 3 skills. Always keep bringing it back to the skills that the interviewer wants to hear about. Let's go back to the skills: problem solving, communication, teamwork, hard work, analytical skills. Always keep coming back to this, okay? And if you're, for instance, interested in a particular part of investment banking, and for instance, that you want to join their consumer business or their e-commerce business, throw that in as well. At this point, I realize that I like to do this. At this point, I realize that I can be a good leader. At this point, I realize that, and give them an example, that I can lead well. I led the team. So walk through your resume in a structured manner. The only way you can walk through your resume in a structured manner is if you have walked through it at least 10 times before, okay? Which means you've written it down, because this is where you hook your interviewer. You tell them, you pretty much try and answer everything they want to know, which is, do you work hard? Do you have these skills? Where have you worked? What can you bring to us? So get it all out of the way. Don't give them an answer. Tell me about yourself. I do this, and then sit still. The worst thing you want is silence between questions. You want to give him enough time to think of the questions he wants to ask you. So talk through that time. Yeah. And so let it become a conversation. And more often than not, if you put in examples through from your resume into your conversation, you will find that they take these as springboards and starting points and start to have a conversation rather than an interview. And then you will find that they get to like you better, and you get to like them, and suddenly it's like having tea or coffee with a friend. And that's the kind of rapport you want to build with your interviewer. Yeah. And you can only do that, I repeat again, if you write this down. Don't freewheel it. Okay, you know what, I think I can freewheel it. That's not going to happen. Write it down, read it again, edit it, make sure you got the grammar in right, read it, learn it by heart. So when you're there, you can, it comes extempo, but it's very, very natural. And then he knows that you're confident and you can hold yourself well. Because remember that the way you pitch yourself in this interview is the way you're going to pitch your business when you work for them. Because that's what we do. We pitch to clients. We go and get business. So if you can't sell yourself in this interview, you're not going to be able to sell the services of your company. Okay, so think of it like that. So that's what he's trying to analyze at this process. Okay, so this is still the what we call the HR part of the interview. Again, as I said, a little recap about what we're saying. Tell me about yourself. What ways will your education help you in this position? Why did you specialize in your particular goal? Tell you about a problem you solved in your previous job. Okay, again, just a quick recap of everything I've told you so far. Your strengths and weaknesses. Again, all of this should have already been in your resume and as part of your tell me about yourself. But let's go back to the strengths and weakness. While nobody really asks you what are your strengths or what are your weaknesses anymore, make sure that your analytical abilities, communication skills, team building, and hard work are your strength, and you need to sell them. Okay. With respect to weaknesses, nobody really asks you your weaknesses directly anymore. They will try and find weaknesses in your resume. So those gap years, perhaps somewhere where you live, perhaps you're in Delhi now, you live in Delhi now and you're looking for, they'll try and understand why are you moving? How are you going to cope with the pressures of moving to a new city? And you need to, when they ask you something like that, hark back to a time in your life where you started anew. So try to find examples from your life for every question they ask. So for instance, in terms of hard work, tell me a little bit about, you need to prove to them. Once you prove to them you have these four qualities, they really don't care about whether you're impatient or perfect. And so giving answers, tropey answers like, oh, I'm a perfectionist, or I work too hard, or I can get impatient, it really doesn't cut it anymore. Yeah. Um, of course, again, recapping what I just said, relate them to the job, give examples of where you've demonstrated them and where they were developed. Where are your weaknesses? Again, as I said, please be very careful when you talk about your weakness. Ideally, your weakness will already be in your resume. They will try and pinpoint it, but as much as you can, stray away from them, unless you want to actually own something like a gap year, or some perhaps a period where you fell ill and had to take 3 to 4 months off. Okay, we don't like we don't like to hear about them too much. But for instance, if you do have a but if you do have a gap year and you have a weakness, tell them that you realize it was that it is there. Perhaps you have bad marks in one year. Perhaps you didn't do very well. Your GPA isn't great. Have a reason for your GPA not being great, and you still want to be part of the job. Okay, have a good reason for that. Okay. Now the elevator pitch. Um, the elevator pitch is essentially, this is not for the tell me about yourself is not going to be 30 seconds. The elevator pitch is essentially something, you're sitting next to the CEO in a flight, you're sitting next to her, you bump into Chanda Kochar, or you bump into any of these people in a conference or anything like that. You need to be able to put yourself forward very, very quickly. The way you do that is essentially to tell them, begin with why you want to work for them. I really liked what you did here. Okay, here. Now, the thing with an elevator pitch is that it has to be customized. So, for instance, if you are meeting someone from ICICI or Edelweiss, you can't just say, hi, I want to work for you. You need to start the conversation with something. I think that deal that you did the other last week was great. I've been really wanting to do this. Then you talk about things you've done in investment banking, the vision you have, the kind of work you want to do, why you want to do this for a living, and from there on, ideally a conversation should begin where you say, can I have your card, etc. Yeah. As I said, describe who you are, the benefits you can bring in terms of skills, competencies, experiences, why you are unique, but always keep it short and engaging, and begin with a lead-in that's customized to them. Okay. Now, you're going to say, how do I know I'm going to meet this person? You don't. Okay, you don't know you're going to meet them, which is why you need to read. You need to be aware. So, for instance, if you know you're sitting next to Ranu Vora on a flight, and you know he is the CEO of Avendus Capital, you need to know you don't have access to the internet, so which means you should have researched the industry pretty well by now. You need to know what deals these banks have done in the last 1 month. So the most important thing here I can tell you in preparation is know what's going on in the industry. And how do you know what's going on in the industry? I hope to God by now you have called at least 80% of the companies out there, know what they're up to. Make sure you're on VC Circle all the time, trying to find out what deals, who's on the league tables, etc., etc. So a great thing for Avendus would be saying, I hear, congratulations, you're third on the M&A domestic league table, and he suddenly knows that you know a little bit about it, and you're not just pitching yourself. And even if you do, you're a good guy to pitch yourself. It's worth his time to listen to you. Yeah. Um, uh, One of the questions I also want to spend time on is your education. Why did you decide? This is something you be honest. If in doubt, be honest in terms of why did you go to this school and not that school? Why did you choose ISB? Why did you wanted? If you went to IIT and you wanted to be an engineer, why on earth do you want to be in investment banking? Why you want to do investment banking is a critical domain, is a critical HR question you need to prepare for. What are the various answers that you can the great things about working for an investment bank, so go back to what's great about working for an investment bank. One of the great things about working for an investment bank is that you get to work across deals, unlike unlike in consulting where you're perhaps working for something just like in consulting, rather than working for the buy side in a corporate where you're going to be doing the exact same job all the time. In investment banking, you get to meet different kinds of clients. You're constantly working in different environments with different companies, with different kinds of people, and you're always going to be doing something interesting. And there's no harm in talking about wanting to be in a dynamic, exciting environment with lots of highs and lows. And always say, I like the pressure. I like being in a pressurized environment where I see results happen quickly. And unlike consulting, I get to close something. Consulting is on a retainer basis. You never really get to close anything. But in investment banking, you get to close a deal. I want to understand the rush that goes along with it is also a great answer. It shows excitement, enthusiasm, and passion, which is what we're looking for, you know. Um, and there's no harm. And if they say something to the extent of, are you doing it for the money? Be fairly honest in that. Of course, the money is great. The money will help me live the lifestyle I want to live. But primarily, it's about the travel. It's about the excitement. I want to work in finance. I want to work with numbers. And if I get the opportunity to work at the epitome of a finance job, why wouldn't I take it? This is essentially the best place to be. And in this place to be, this is the best company I want to work for. And that's why I want to work for you, both personally and your team. So I hope that's a great answer for why you want to work for us and why you want to be an investment banker. Yeah. Uh, uh, During an interview, during personal interviews, do you want to, if a lot of them are going to be hard questions, feel free to, one, get a notepad in front of you. Um, you feel free to take out a calculator and put it on your side so that you're saying, I'm going to prepare. And it's perfectly fine to say, give me a minute while I answer your question, because some of these questions are going to be quite technical. And, to say, you can also, of course, say, no one's ever asked me that before. And can you repeat that question if you're too nervous, and if you want to clarify, repeat the question to clarify the question, and that's a good way to get by yourself enough time to know what you're talking, to make sure you can gather your thoughts to give a coherent answer. Remember, your answer needs to be well thought out and coherent. And of course, you've already done this in the mock interview, so you should ideally know the answers to a lot of these questions. But sometimes they throw you a curveball, and that's perfectly fine. So then sit back and say, can you repeat that question? Can you give me some time to think about that? Can you, if you're asking, what I don't, what you shouldn't get is flustered or answer immediately. Don't answer immediately for any question they ask, because they want you to think a little bit about it. So even though I know you've written down all your answers now and you've got sheets of paper and you know your answers, compose yourself and take time to answer every single question. Okay, dealing with nerves. Being nervous is normal. Do not apologize for it continuously. Now, this third point might seem like I'm contradicting myself. Control excessive talking and stick to the point. It's not about giving them information is not excessive talking. What I mean by excessive talking is coming in and saying, oh, your tie is nice. I really like this room. It's cold in here. I really like AC. It's the monsoons. They're not interested in what you think about the weather as that much, That's what I mean by, when I mean sticking to the point, I mean stick to telling them about yourself. Okay? And of course, the best way to combat nervousness is to have done it 10 times before and just think of this as just another 10th time. Yeah. softly toot your own horn. You've already done this with talking about yourself, organizing your thoughts, applying your skill, and of course, finally, legal questions. This will, of course, happen in the HR round. Some of them they ask questions like disabilities, marital status. Sometimes you can be asked it, sometimes you can't be asked it. National origin, whether if you're going to look for, if you're hunting for a job in HK, you need to let them know that you don't have a work permit. Legal questions, be honest, is the answer. Please, anyway, they cannot ask you anything about your birth date or your arrest record, etc. of that sort. But be honest about most of these things. The where, of course, then finally tips, get there 15 minutes early, be pleasant, polite, friendly like, check your appearance before you go, and what, of course, we're going to, now we're going to, of course, spend some time on the 15 questions, and I hope that helped. Another 15 questions in the meat of the thing that we like in investment banking. The first investment banking positions are they're stressful interviews, and they essentially the technical parts are designed to test two things. Essentially how well you know your stuff, and two, we've already talked about the HR stuff now, so and two, how you handle pressure. While this is specifically relevant in equity trading instances, it's also very, very relevant in investment banking interviews. So, of course, to start with, of course, again, the top question, and I hope you got your pencil and pad out. We're going to talk through some of my most important questions. So, yes, I hope you got your, okay. Again, number one question, we're going to read, why do you want to do investment banking? Okay, talk to as many people out there. We've already answered this question. Make it enthusiastic. Make it not about, because I've always wanted to do investment banking. No, that's not enough. If you do have an anecdote like me, like I saw Capital City and they were walking, after that, follow it up with something much more detail oriented. And you need to illustrate succinctly that you know the job functions of the position, that you know how to value, that you like valuation, that you like modeling, that you like being part of a deal. What exactly do investment bankers do? You don't know how many times people get this wrong. What do we do for a living? I'm not going to tell you that here, but find out what we do for a living. Exactly what we do. And there are parts where there are banks that will only do M&A. So there's no point telling them, while you're going to tell them, so add in. So for instance, investment bankers do M&A, they syndicate private equity and public equity, correct? But there are some banks that will only syndicate private equity and not public equity, because if they're not book running lead managers, which is how you run an IPO, they're not going to be running an IPO. So if you're going to tell them, this is what investment bankers do, then follow it up with saying, but I know that you don't run IPOs, you do not have an ECM team, I know you only focus on M&A and private equity syndication. Okay, and I also know that you only focus on these sectors, or etc., etc., etc. Throw in words like origination, execution, closure, due diligence. These are terms that tell them you know what investment banking is. Okay. One question that I ask a lot is, here's a whiteboard, stand in front of it and present a chapter from your favorite book. Okay. Why do we ask this? We ask this so that you perhaps know how to summarize an argument or a state of affairs or a situation. And then you can pick out the salient features and tell me about them. Okay. And also want to test your presentation skills. Okay. So are you comfortable presenting this material? Okay. Of course, walk me through your resume. Why should we hire you? Again, illustrate your position. I have Again, what are the four things? Problem-solving skills, analytical skills, teamwork, communication, and hard work. Okay, and of course now we're going to go into some of the technical questions. The first one is, of course, the first question they ask all the time is, how do you value a company? Now, the way you ask in terms of answer how you value a company is, in my opinion, start with you value a company in two ways, market-based valuation and income-based valuation, and then get an example. Take an example. For instance, if I'm valuing a private pencil manufacturing company, this is how I would value it. What happens then is he immediately knows that you're able to apply your knowledge into a real situation, and you can then use the pencil to articulate, because it's really hard saying, then you do this, then you do that, then you do that. It's boring as well, right? It's boring if I tell you first I do this, then I do that. But if you then take a pencil manufacturer and you start talking about wood and eraser and pencil tips and the pencil industry and how you're going to figure out how to forecast the pencil industry, you've suddenly taken up 20 minutes of his time and you've told him everything you know about valuation, so that he's left with nothing to ask you and he can just move on. And he's like, oh my God, this person knows everything. But if you say, we value a company using market-based valuation and income-based valuation, and you sit there, he's like, okay, tell me a little bit more. Okay, the worst thing you want from interviewers is tell me a little bit more. Expand on that further. You should expand it as much as, in my opinion, as much as you can. And then they say, okay, fine, you know what, you know everything. What the situation you want is, you know everything. So valuation, so that then takes care of valuation. What is the difference? A little bit of few about accounting. They want to know a little bit about the fact that a question like, walk me through the P&L, walk me through the balance sheet, the links between the balance sheet, walk me through the cash flow. What happens to each of the three primary financial statements if you change the gross margin, capital expenditure, you know, what is, and then they can throw you in something, and I do this all the time. One question that I really, really like is, what is the CAPM model? And so you're stuck. And you've already told him about valuation. He says, and then he says, give me the CAPM equation. And then you give him the CAPM equation, and he'll say, give me the ratio to give me the what is the beta? What are the two types of beta? How do you what is the difference between? And then at this point, you better have said a leveraged and unleveraged beta, because then tell them, and then follow it up with the formula for leveraging or unleveraging beta. Okay. How do you calculate the terminal value of a company? What does another question I like is, what does the PE multiple signify? What does it mean? Now, he doesn't want to know how you calculate it, but tell him anyway, or tell her anyway. But also tell her what you think about it. What does it mean? And then use an example, because you've written it out. You've actually written out these examples. Okay, so you've written out the examples, and at this point, I want to spend a little bit of time telling you how you prepare from the technical aspect. Make sure you know 3 sectors and 3 companies in those 3 sectors, which means 9 companies inside out. Which means if I say, tell me the meaning of PE, choose a company and talk about what the PE of 10 of that company means versus the PE of 5 of another company in the same sector. And he knows that you know what you're talking about. But if you just tell him PE is the industry's idea of what a stock is going to be, he's going to like, okay, he's just learned that by heart. But if you apply it again, you'll know exactly, you'll show him that you know what you're talking about, not just from Damodaran on valuation, but you actually know how to apply this stuff. Okay, what are the different multiples that can be used to value a company? Another way people ask you how to value a company, okay, is they will not ask you how do you value a company. They'll say, how much would you pay for a company with $50 million in revenue and $5 million in profit? And you're like, sorry, how do you pay for a company with $50 million in revenue and $5 million in profit? You can't go, what he's trying to do is trying to establish that you know how to make assumptions and have a logical mind. So what you do then is you say, okay, if this is all the information you can give me, I will assume all the other information. So I will assume that they have debt or equity of this amount. I will assume that it's a debt-free company. I will assume that it is doing this, that it's privately listed, and therefore using that information, I would value this company in this yada 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 manner. Yeah, exactly. Um, uh, Another question, of course, now all your hard work's going to pay off, because they're going to say, which industries are you interested in? You have 3 sectors. Choose one of you choose your favorite 2 sectors, and then what are the multiples you use for those industries? You already have those sectors, so pick the major events. It could be e-commerce, but choose nice, well-researched industries like cement or uh, you know uh, logistics, pharma, anything. If you're going to choose something like pharma, and if they, for instance, if they have a massive pharma vertical and you are interested in pharma, you're just going to, if you don't worry about not knowing enough about pharma. He knows you're not an investment banker yet, but the fact that you've chosen pharma and know so much about it already makes when he looks at you tomorrow and sitting with his team versus somebody else, he'll be like, wow, yeah, that person knew a lot about pharma. They've worked really hard. um, Talk about, describe a typical company's typical capital structure. Don't get flummoxed. Walk through the balance sheet. That's all it is. Walk through the balance sheet. Okay. And of course, there's a fair possibility that they will give you a case. For instance, they might give you some information, with respect to, this is a case of how much, a P&L, a balance sheet, and a cash flow, and they might ask you to forecast, and they'll give you 10 points in terms of the industry, what things going to happen in the industry, what do you think is going. Take a piece of paper out, take your time, and work through it. You've done this before. How have you done this before? Because you have valued all companies in your sector before. Okay, you have run through this. Okay, and if you don't have information, assume it. That's the important thing. Assume information. Use logic. Ask them if they're not giving you the information. Assume the information. Yeah. Um, and I think if you are planning to, if you do have, don't get caught out. If you are going to research a company, make sure you know the PE as of yesterday, the Sensex. Here are some basic things. You need to know what the Sensex and the Nifty is at. You need to know what your interest rates are at, what your bond rates are at. You need to know the foreign exchange rates. You need to know what's been happening in the world for at least a month now. If, for instance, you go into an investment banking interview today and you don't know the salient features of the Walmart Flipkart deal, just wait there. If you want to know the salient features of the Walmart Flipkart deal, we had a webinar 2 weeks ago. I would advise looking at that. Then I'm not going to hire you. Because if you have no interest in the Walmart Flipkart deal, then I don't think you're interested in this job. Okay, so read the paper religiously every day. Mark out points that you think are going to come up in the interview. Immerse yourself. As I end this, and if I have 10 minutes left, immerse yourself in the industry. Immerse yourself in the industry. Read about it. Go to VC Circle. Find out what's happening. What are the deals? Go to Deal Tracker. Go to Bloomberg. Go to Reuters. Get as much information as you can about this world. Become part of the world even before you are part of the world. And they will see that, and then they will hire you. So now we have 10 minutes left. Please, I am going to go and look at your questions now and open the chat. I'm going to look for my question dialog box. Where is the chat? I think it's here. No, it's not here. Hina, can you just open up the chat if there are any questions for me, please? I can't find the chat box, the other chat box. Just give me a second. Well, while we wait for some questions, let me quickly run you through any other tips that that we have. Of course, one of the times that I remember, the One of the big questions that I always find I trick them into is trying to find out if they're going to work hard, and that usually says, uh, um, you have a presentation, it's Diwali and you have a presentation, how would you tell your parents that you are not going to make it home in time for a family wedding or Diwali? This is a tricky one. I think here they're essentially trying to understand how hard you're going to work and what your concept of work-life balance is. At this point in time, tell them you're not interested in having work-life balance is always my way to go. Because you're not interested in having work-life balance if you're going to work for, are you going to join an investment bank as an analyst? That's not something that you are, going to have. And so I think use this opportunity to sell yourself a little bit better in terms of how you have always chosen work. And while you think family is important and having fun is important, really work is essentially is that's why you're here and you want to prove yourself. Um, thing. Okay, so I have lots of questions here. Um, Okay, ma'am, how to answer, what would you look to accomplish in the first 30, 60 days, 90 days? That's a fantastic question. In the first 30 days, I would like to find out, because you say that you want to get right in. I want to understand how, I'll have a look at your templates. I will make sure I'm able to, I will try and make sure I can contribute to deals that I'm working on with my team. Try to ensure that I would like to pitch at least one. I'd like to make a pitch presentation, make a deal deck, pitch deck at least in the first 30 days. I would like to ensure, I'd like to be very keen to do a financial model, be part of a transaction. Remember that the investment banking job is very simple in that we essentially help our team originate deals as an analyst. We execute deals and we close deals, which means we look for a job, we execute the job, and we close the transaction. So essentially, you want to be part of the process. You want to learn. I already know how to do all of these things. I already know how to model. I want to apply my knowledge as quickly as possible. What type of interview questions will be asked for engineers? Essentially, the questions that will be asked for engineers is, why do you want to do investment banking for a living? And a great answer is, while now the normal answer is, of course, while I have an affinity for numbers, but I also have an affinity for finance. And investment banking is a great place where finance and numbers mix. Okay. Why did you select our company? I've asked you, go research why you selected a company. So find at least 3 instances, go find 3 deals, 3 parts in the news, and pick one. Hi, this is how to pitch stock. Hi, this is not a domain webinar. In fact, how to pitch, but that's part of our. But you can feel free to look up our EY FAP curriculum and be part of our program. That's what we teach you. We teach you how to pitch a stock. Not only how to pitch a stock, we teach you how to value stocks, how to value companies, how to do forecast and financial modeling. We have an online program, as you know. So even if you're not based out of Bombay, I highly recommend joining the program so that you can actually, know how to pitch a stock. Yeah. What if you aren't for a commerce background? How do we prepare for questions asked in accounting? Again, you have to learn it. If you're not from a commerce background, you essentially need to join a 3-month program like EYFAP that will teach you the fundamentals of accounting, valuation, forecasting, and financial modeling, so that you can actually crack an investment banking interview. You're not going to be able to do that if you don't know these answers to these questions. What if you answer anything wrong? Akash Mukherjee asks. That's perfectly fine. You just say, I'm sorry, I think I answered that wrong. Can I try again? And they will let you try again. They're not here to make your life hell. Remember, the interviewer is wants to find someone good. We don't want to interview hundreds of people. We want to go into a good interview. We want to have a good interview, and we want to hire you. You need to give us all the reasons to hire you. And that means knowing everything that we need you to know. But if you happen to answer something wrong, it also means having the confidence to say, can I try again? A computer course like Tally will not help at all in investment banking because it's not an accounting job. A course like the course you kind of need to do is something like EY, EY FAP, a commerce course, an MBA in finance. Yeah. Hi, answer. Mahalakshmi B, what would be the ideal answer when asked about weaknesses in an interview? We have covered this, but if they don't ask you that question as much anymore. But if they do happen to ask you the question anymore, tell them your weaknesses. What is your weakness? Look at actually find out, do you have any weaknesses in your resume? Do you have a gap here? Find something specific. I don't like behavioral weaknesses. Find something specific like, okay, I had a gap here. I'm not, or if you don't find any weaknesses in numbers, don't find any weaknesses in hard work. I know what weaknesses I don't like to hear about, but gap years. I fell ill this one point, so perhaps this has not been represented properly. A weakness could be that I can be a little shy, is fine, a little shy at times, but once I learn about a situation, I can be better. I have already answered this question, Rashita. Why did you select our company? Thank you. So this means your Harish Kumar is asking any heads up for a candidate from a different industry. Well, so it's a lateral transfer. Yes, why do you want to be in investment banking? And I've given you the answers for that already, and those will suffice. If you are little, those will suffice, and you do need to convince them a little if that you really want to move, but you need have some sort of trigger moment where you decided that you wanted to be in investment banking. Again, while you're coming into IB field, I've answered this question, Vangala. How to explain the daily schedule in work? Well, actually, very simple. If you go into our knowledge center, you will find our typical work day of an investment banker, and that will clearly give you what a typical work day in an investment banker is. But please know that I'm not going to ask you what my day looks like, so don't worry about that. If you don't know something an interview asks you, just say, I don't know. If you really don't know. So unless they ask you something like the Black-Scholes model, you should ideally know everything they're going to ask you. So try answering it in any way possible. Okay? But if you don't know the answer to the CAPM, for instance, it's going to be very hard for you to get that job. Or you need to tell them why you don't know it. Okay? Because that's Virushi Dehankar is saying, I simply tell them that I'm interested in a finance career, but still they never seem satisfied, because that's not enough. Why are you interested in a finance career? What are the reasons why you want to be in finance? And I've answered this question before. Yeah. What qualities does an investment banker need? Again, I have answered this before, but we'll run through that very quickly. Problem solving, analytical skills, communication skills, that means written and oral communication. Excel and PowerPoint needs to be very strong. Hard work, team skills, and leadership skills to some extent. You were once asked to be honest and poor or dishonest and rich. The way you ask that is that I would prefer to be honest and rich, because that's exactly what you would prefer to be. No, see, it depends on anything wrong. Will it make a major negative impact? If you don't know how to value a company, absolutely. If you don't know how to value a company, you shouldn't be going to an investment banking interview. Yeah. Yeah. But if you don't know how to answer something very specific, like how to leverage a beta or unlever a beta, and that could be that's a small part of the entire picture. And if you answer anything wrong with respect to, for instance, the PE of a company was the Sensex was a different number from the one you thought it was, that doesn't really make any difference. Yeah, because you know the Sensex from the day before and you told it from yesterday, that's perfectly fine. Hi, Aishwarya Varthi. Thank you so much. My pleasure. Yes, you are an auditor in the Big Four. You will be asked a lot of questions with regard to your previous job, especially with regards to why you want to change from audit, why you want to leave a Big Four and join an investment bank. It's a very easy answer. I answered it before: dynamic, different industries, working with clients, etc., etc. Two, what did you do in your previous job? You have great experience in a Big Four. Use parts of your previous job to actually sell your abilities for your new job. Okay. What is a different level of IB? Hi, I don't understand that question, Ankit. Please ask me again. I am how different. Harshal Patel wants to know how different or tougher will it be for an interview for a fresher than an experienced. They're different jobs. If you're going for an analyst, if you have experience, it's going to be tougher for you to get in because they're quite specific about what age they hire you at. They're not going to hire you a 32-year-old analyst. So they are going to see if they have a place for you at your, while they're not specific about age group, they don't mind hiring maybe a 27-year-old for an associate job or a 29-year-old for an associate job. That's fine, but it depends. It's a very specific answer. I have prepared a valuation model for. Akshit wants to know a valuation model for an automotive company as part of a project. What questions can I? Again, how did you do it? What did you do? What's required? Except talk them through the entire process of doing that for you. What if I don't know the answer to a question? I've answered that. How to improve your communication skills? Read a lot, write a lot more, uh, do a lot of mock interviews, at least 20 mock interviews. At least 20 mock interviews, get better and better. And of course, join the EY FAP, and we actually have an entire program on communication skills. What qualifications are required to join an IB firm? Primarily, they look for commerce or an engineering background. It's a great question in myself, 5 years to 10 years. I think the important thing to do is to put a career path for yourself. What is your goal? My goal is to be SVP in 5 years, a director in 10 years in your firm. And that's what I want to be. I want to see myself in your firm in 5 years or 10 years doing an SVP or a VP. Is a director. I think it's a very easy question to answer. Having done lots of deals across a number of verticals, perhaps maybe a specialize in one vertical, head that vertical, do large big ticket transactions with great valuations, and create a lot of value for my clients. No, absolutely not. Ankit Jaswal wants to know if it's compulsory to do a CFA or another course to become IB. It is not compulsory to do a CFA or any other course to become an IB. However, remember, it's great to do a course like the EY FAP or any other thing so that you understand what investment banking is about. Yes, the EY FAP can help you enter into investment banking. SAP, Rashita wants to know if SAP will help you in investment banking. It's unlikely. Sorry. No, a passport is not mandatory before getting into the interview. However, if they might ask you if you have a passport. If they ask you if you have a passport, just say you are in the process of applying for a passport. But don't lie and tell them you have a passport. Okay, I'm looking for another good answer. What if I have, say, I'm not able to get a passport? What all websites? A great question from Midun R. What websites will help us increase knowledge? VC Circle, Bloomberg, Reuters, Deal Tracker, Merger Market, Our 5 sites, like obviously the Economic Times, the Financial Times, will all, and CNBC for knowledge increase. Yeah. Yes, they do ask. Sometimes they ask tricky questions like, what's a good tricky question? If you have 2 coins, they ask statistics question. You have 2 coins in this purse and 4 coins in that purse. Yes, they do ask puzzles. For puzzles, just go into to the internet and perhaps do a few quick puzzles. Yes, they do sometimes, but not as much anymore. They don't really have the time. They're not going to spend too much time worrying about your negotiation skills unless you are applying for a senior position, Mashun Lungang, because if you're an analyst or an associate, they're going to focus more on your technical skills like valuation, financial modeling and forecasting, and accounting. Justify your answer is essentially explain your answer a little bit further, Naushad. You have a 9-year career gap. I think the IB. Remember that we're not so. Remember that the EY FAP course is also about trying to kickstart a career in finance. So it's not just investment banking, Divya. It's about going. You can become a CFO of a startup. You can absolutely work for a small investment private equity fund. You can, you can be part of. You can join a company. There are a number of jobs that you can do. You can join a brokerage firm. Number of jobs you can do with an investment bank with the EY FAP course at your back, because you learn about the industry, and with that knowledge you can actually go and do a number of things and work for small companies and help them raise funds, help them be because it teaches you corporate finance and how to run a firm, and you can even start your own firm for that matter. You manage your gaps in your interview, Sankirt, with honesty and with a rationale for why that gap happened. Yeah, that's how you do that. Is MBA in finance important? Yes. Well, I mean, an MBA is not very critical, but you do need to have prior knowledge of it's to crack the interview. To honestly, there are no pre-qualifications for investment banking, but they would like you to know something about it before they hire you, which means you either need to have a small course like EY FAP, or you need to have an MBA in finance, so that they can weed you out from the thousands of resumes you make. Yes, again, VC Circle, Bloomberg, Reuters, Deal Tracker, Grant Thornton, Merger Market for Deals, and PwC Insights, EY Insights, even our own website, our Knowledge Center has a ridiculous amount of information on investment banking, on how to crack interviews, on learning material, etc. Hi, I think we're going to call it a day. And thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being part of this and helping you further in your career. I hope this was very, very helpful. I look very forward to seeing some of you in the EY FAP course soon. And until then, see you and best of luck for all your careers. Thank you very much. Bye bye.